It sounds pretty simple, right? A farmer leases a plot of land to grow crops. But depending on the economic lens you look through, you get two wildly different stories. One sees a straightforward business deal, the other, a complicated web of power and history. Today, we're diving into how these two major theories look at the exact same farm and come to totally opposite conclusions.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to unpack these two competing visions. We'll start with how they define the farmer in the first place, then look at the role rent plays and the big choices a landlord has to make. After that, we'll see how a huge technological shift turned the whole system on its head, and finally, we'll explore why this isn't just some dusty academic debate, it has massive real-world consequences.
All right, so in one corner, we have the mainstream neoclassical approach. In the other, the Marxist approach. The fascinating thing is, they're both looking at the same field, the same farmer, the same lease, but what they see couldn't be more different. It's like they're wearing two completely different pairs of glasses. And this one question gets right to the heart of it. Are tenants more or less efficient than landowners? Now, for the neoclassical school, this is a puzzle about incentives and contracts. But for the Marxist perspective, asking about efficiency kind of misses the entire point because it completely sidesteps the more fundamental issue of class.
And that leads us right into the first huge point of disagreement. Who are we even talking about when we use a word like peasant or farmer? It sounds so basic, but as you'll see, their definitions are worlds apart. Okay, so check this out. This is where you really see the divide. The neoclassical view likes to simplify things. It imagines this single, representative farmer, kind of an everyman. And the main question is just whether they own or rent their land. But the Marxist view says, whoa, hold on. You can't understand anything if you don't see that the peasantry isn't one big happy group. It's actually a collection of different classes, rich, middle, and poor, all with competing interests that grew out of a long history of inequality. And that whole idea is built around this crucial concept, class differentiation. In the Marxist framework, this is the engine of change. It's the idea that, over time, a group that was once pretty similar, the peasantry, starts to break apart. Some get ahead, become wealthy farmers who hire other people, while many others fall behind, lose their land, and have no choice but to sell their own labor to get by. Now, once you start thinking in terms of these different classes, it totally changes how you look at rent. Suddenly, it's not just a simple payment for using a piece of land. It becomes something way more powerful and complex. And this gets us to the idea of absolute ground rent. You can think of it like this. It's not a payment based on how fertile the soil is. It's the income a landlord can get just because they have the deed to a resource that everyone needs to survive. It's basically a fee you have to pay just for access, plain and simple. And for Marxists, this is a huge deal. They would argue that neoclassical theory, by focusing only on rents from, say, better soil, is missing the forest for the trees. It ignores this massive power imbalance that lets landlords collect a kind of monopoly rent, which then acts as this giant barrier preventing any real investment or improvement on the land. Okay, so given these different views on class and rent, what does a landlord actually do? Do they kick back and just collect rent checks, or do they roll up their sleeves and get into the business of farming themselves? Well, first, we got to understand that not all leasing is the same. There's what you might call hunger leasing. This is when a poor, landless peasant leases a tiny plot just to feed their family. The goal is pure survival. And then you have capitalist leasing, where a wealthy farmer or entrepreneur leases more land, specifically to scale up, hire more workers, and make a profit. It's the same action, leasing land, but for completely opposite reasons. And this really is the million-dollar question. I mean, think about it. If you're a landlord collecting high, stable rent from a bunch of desperate hunger-leasing tenants, why on earth would you give up that easy, risk-free income? Why would you take on all the stress and headaches of managing production, hiring labor, and buying expensive equipment? Well, the answer lies in this really powerful disincentive that economists call the rent barrier. It's a surprisingly simple calculation, but it shows why just standing still can often be the most rational, profitable choice. Okay, let's walk through this together. A landlord who leases out their land has two income streams. First, they get the rent from the land itself. Let's call that R. And second, since their money isn't tied up in tractors and seeds, they can invest it somewhere else, maybe in money lending or trade, and earn an average profit. We'll call that P. So their total income is R plus P.
Now, for them to switch to farming the land themselves, the profit from that farm has to be bigger than R plus P combined. It's not enough to just make a normal profit. They have to make a surplus profit, big enough to replace the rent they'd be giving up. And that is a really, really high bar to clear. So for a long, long time, this rent barrier basically locked a lot of agricultural economies in place. It just didn't make sense to change. But then, something came along that was powerful enough to just smash right through that barrier. And this quote from the scholar Utsa Patnaik, whose work really informs this whole explainer, just nails it. She perfectly sums up the situation. For most landlords, the economic logic to invest and modernize just wasn't there. And that game changer? It was the Green Revolution. All of a sudden, you have these new technologies, high-yield seeds, chemical fertilizers, new irrigation techniques, and they made it possible to get this massive quantum jump in how much you could produce. For the very first time, farming the land directly could not just meet, but blow past the income you'd get from simply leasing it out. So this massive technological shift opened up two new playbooks for the landlords. The first path was pretty blunt. Evict the tenants, buy some tractors, and hire wage workers. Simple. But the second path was a bit more subtle. You keep the tenants on the land, but you transform their role entirely. The landlord now provides all the new expensive inputs, the seeds, the fertilizer, and makes all the key decisions. This effectively turns the tenant from an independent farmer into more of a piece-rate laborer who just gets a small slice of a much, much bigger pie. Okay, so we've been pretty deep in economic theory here. Why should any of us care? Well, because the lens you use to see a simple tenant farmer ends up shaping huge policies on everything from land reform to food security to global poverty. This is not just an academic squabble. And this really boils it all down. At the end of the day, the neoclassical method starts small, with an abstract individual, a representative firm, making rational choices. It's a microeconomic model. The Marxist method starts big. It starts with the concrete, messy, historically formed class structure of a real society. It's not about analyzing individual choices, but the relationships between these classes. It's a model of political economic. And all of this leaves us with a huge question for the future. As farm technology keeps getting more and more advanced, which vision of the farmer is going to win out? Is the future of agriculture going to be defined by millions of independent family farms making efficient choices? Or will it be defined by a growing class of laborers, people who might still be called tenants on paper, but who in reality are working for massive, centralized operations with very little independence? The theory you choose doesn't just explain the past, it helps us understand and maybe even shape the answer.